The photograph arrived on a cold January morning, wrapped with a care that suggested it was more than paper and ink. Maya Richardson noticed that immediately. She ran a specialized photo restoration studio in Brooklyn, and over 15 years she had handled thousands of damaged images, Civil War tintypes cracked like dried leaves, Victorian portraits faded into ghosts, family albums warped by floods and time. Most packages came casually packed, as if the sender didn't quite understand what they were trusting her with. This one was different. The photograph was carefully folded inside acid-free tissue, sealed within a padded envelope. Even before opening it, Maya felt the weight of history in her hands. The return address read Charleston, South Carolina, written in a careful, slightly trembling script. The sender's name was Grace Thompson. Inside was a short letter. "This photograph has been in my family for generations. It's the only image we have of my great-great-grandmother's family. It's badly damaged, but I'm told you're the best. Please help me see their faces clearly." Maya set the letter aside and gently lifted the photograph into the light. It was in worse condition than she had expected. The emulsion, the fragile surface layer, had cracked and peeled in several places. Water damage had soaked the bottom third of the image, leaving dark stains that crept upward like shadows. Someone, decades earlier, had tried to fix it with glue and crude touch-ups, only making the damage more severe. Yet beneath all of that, shapes were still visible. 7 figures. They stood in front of what looked like a wooden house with a wide porch. The photograph was mounted on thick cardboard backing, warped with age. Maya carefully turned it over. Written in faded pencil on the back were just a few words: June 1906, Charleston. Below the date were names, but most were smeared beyond recognition by water damage. Maya photographed the original immediately, creating a high-resolution digital master so she wouldn't have to handle the fragile print again. Then she settled into her workstation, opened her restoration software, and began the slow, meticulous work she knew so well. First came the structural repair. Cracks were filled by cloning undamaged areas. Stains were reduced layer by layer. Discoloration from the old repair attempt was removed with surgical precision. It was tedious work, the kind that demanded hours of concentration and absolute patience. 3 hours passed without her noticing. When Maya finally leaned back in her chair, stretching her shoulders, the image had transformed. Not perfect, but coherent. Now she could see them clearly. A family of 7 stood on the porch of their home. The adults were dressed in their best clothes. The man wore a dark suit with a high collar, his posture straight, his expression serious. Beside him stood a woman in a white blouse and long skirt, her gaze steady, her presence strong. 5 children surrounded them. The oldest, a teenage boy, stood near his father, already tall and broad-shouldered. 2 girls, perhaps 12 and 10, wore braided hair tied with white ribbons. A younger boy grinned openly, one front tooth missing, and then there was the youngest child. A little girl sat on the porch steps, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked no older than 4. That area of the photograph had been the most damaged. A dark water stain had nearly erased her face entirely. For now, she was little more than a blur of shadow and suggestion. Maya saved her progress and shut down her workstation. The structural work was finished. Tomorrow, she would begin restoring the faces, bringing clarity to expressions that hadn't been seen in over a century. She had no idea that one of those faces was about to change everything. Maya returned to the studio early the next morning, carrying the strongest coffee she could find, and the quiet anticipation that always came with the most delicate part of restoration. The structure was fixed. Now came the faces. This was the moment when shadows became people. She reopened the file and zoomed in on the adults first. Faces from this era required restraint. Too much sharpening could turn humanity into wax. Maya worked slowly, increasing contrast just enough to reveal skin texture, softening noise without erasing age. The man's face emerged first. Mid-30s, she guessed. A strong jaw. Deep, set eyes that carried seriousness rather than hardness. He stood with his hand resting lightly on the woman's shoulder. Not a pose of ownership, but of partnership. The kind of gesture that spoke without words. The woman beside him came into focus next. Her expression surprised Maya. There was intelligence there. Determination. Even through the stiffness of early photography, her gaze was direct, unafraid. Managing a household and 5 children in 1906 Charleston would have demanded strength few people today could imagine. And somehow it showed in the set of her mouth and the way she held herself upright. Maya moved to the children. The oldest boy's face sharpened easily, youthful but already carrying responsibility. The 2 girls revealed delicate features. Carefully braided hair, ribbons placed with intention. The younger boy's grin became unmistakable once his missing tooth appeared, frozen forever in that brief window of childhood confidence. Everything was proceeding normally, comfortably. Then Maya zoomed in on the youngest child, the little girl on the steps. The water damage here was severe. A dark stain obscured most of her face, leaving only fragments of detail. Maya began carefully, lifting discoloration layer by layer, reconstructing what time had erased. As the image clarified, Maya stopped moving. Something wasn't right. She increased magnification, focusing on the area around the eyes and forehead. Grain danced across the screen, but beneath it, details were forming. Details that made her breath catch. She leaned closer. The spacing of the eyes was unusual, wider than expected. Not distorted by damage, this was structural, intentional, real. Maya adjusted contrast again. A faint light patch appeared in the child's hair, right near the crown. Not damage, not glare. A streak, lighter than the rest of her dark hair. Maya felt a slow chill move through her chest. She had seen countless variations of human faces. Every inherited quirk, every accident of bone and muscle. But this combination, this pattern, set off something deeper than professional curiosity. Then she saw the eyes. Even through the limitations of early 20th century photography, even accounting for shadows and aging paper, the difference was unmistakable. One eye was dark, the other was lighter. Not reflection. Not damage. Different. Maya sat back in her chair, heart pounding. In 1906, this shouldn't have been identifiable. Not clearly. Not like this. She stared at the child's face again, feeling the weight of realization settle in. Whatever she was seeing wasn't just unusual. It was something that wouldn't even have had a name in that era. And if she was right, this child would have lived her early life marked as different in a time and place where difference could be dangerous. Maya reached for her phone. There was only one person she trusted to confirm what her instincts were screaming. Dr. James Wright arrived at Maya's studio that afternoon, curiosity written plainly across his face. He was tall, silver-haired, and moved with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades studying the human body and its history. Maya had called him before, when restored photographs revealed signs of illness, injury, or disability that families had never understood. He was careful, methodical, never dramatic, which was why his reaction mattered. Maya had the image waiting on her largest monitor, zoomed tightly on the youngest child's face. She said nothing as James leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, studying the screen in silence. Seconds passed. Then a full minute. Maya watched his expression shift. First professional interest, then intense concentration, and finally something close to disbelief. "You see it too," Maya said, quietly. James straightened slowly and nodded. "If this photograph is authentic," he said, choosing each word carefully, "and I have no reason to believe it isn't, then yes, I'm seeing clear markers of a genetic condition." Maya's pulse quickened. "Which one?" James leaned back in his chair and gestured toward the screen. "Start with the eyes. The distance between the inner corners, what we call dystopia cantharum. That spacing isn't damage or distortion. It's anatomical." He pointed next to the child's hairline. "There's a hyperpigmented streak here, a white forelock. Not aging, not exposure. Natural." Then he paused. "And the eyes," he said softly. "That's the most telling feature." Maya leaned closer as he indicated them. Even now, the difference was unmistakable. One eye dark, the other pale, blue or gray. "Heterochromia," James said. "Complete heterochromia iridis." "Different colored eyes," Maya swallowed. "In 1906, James nodded slowly. "Combined with the facial spacing and hair pigmentation. This is almost certainly Waardenburg syndrome, type 1. Maya felt a chill crawl up her spine. "But that wasn't identified until the 1950s, she said. "This photograph is from June 1906. James folded his hands. "The condition always existed. It just didn't have a name. Petrus Waardenburg was simply the first to recognize the pattern and define it medically." He looked at the child's face again, his voice lowering. For a black child in the segregated South, having visible differences like this, it would have made her stand out in ways people didn't understand. Maya imagined the scene. A little girl with one light eye and one dark. A white streak in her hair. Facial features that didn't match expectations, in a world governed by rigid racial boundaries and superstition. "What would people have thought?" Maya asked. James exhaled. "They might have assumed mixed ancestry. Some would have feared albinism. Others might have believed she was marked, blessed or cursed, depending on belief. And in Charleston, in 1906, he trailed off. It would have been complicated, possibly dangerous." Maya glanced back at the restored image. The child wasn't smiling. She sat still, hands folded, expression serious, almost guarded. It struck Maya that this wasn't a child unaware of being watched. It was a child already accustomed to it. Maya pulled up Grace Thompson's letter on her screen. She said, "This is her great-great-grandmother's family," Maya said. "She's been trying to understand them for years." James didn't hesitate. "You have to tell her." "You're sure?" "This is part of her family's history. And more than that, this might be one of the earliest photographic records of this condition in an African-American child." Maya finished the restoration that evening with new care, ensuring that nothing was exaggerated. When she printed the final image, the child's features were unmistakable, but gentle. Human. She packaged one copy for Grace and kept another for her records. Then she sat down to write. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she began. Dear Members, Thompson, I've completed the restoration of your family photograph. During the process, I discovered something significant about the youngest child in the image. She shows physical characteristics consistent with a genetic condition called Waardenburg syndrome, which affects pigmentation and facial structure. This condition was not identified until decades later, so your ancestors would not have had a name for what made her different. I'm sharing this because it may help explain parts of your family history. If you'd like to talk further, I'd be honored to help. Maya hesitated. She was about to tell a stranger something deeply personal about an ancestor, something that could reshape how an entire family understood its past. Then she clicked send. 3 days later, her phone rang, a Charleston area code. Miss Richardson, the voice asked, trembling slightly. This is Grace Thompson. I received your email. Maya held her breath. The little girl. Grace continued. The one with the different colored eyes. That's my great-great-grandmother. Maya's heart skipped. Do you know her name? Yes, Grace said. The name was Sarah. There was a pause. And I think, Grace added quietly, I finally understand why no one ever talked about her. Grace's voice was steady, but Maya could hear the emotion underneath it. After I read your email, Grace said, I started going through every family paper I could find. Letters, Bible records, old clippings my grandmother kept but never explained. I've been trying to piece Sarah's story together for years. Maya listened quietly. There are so many gaps. Grace continued. My grandmother almost never spoke about her own grandmother. When she did, she was vague. I always wondered why. Maya already suspected the answer. Grace took a breath. I found a letter from 1924. Sarah wrote it to her daughter, my great-grandmother. She talks about being different her whole life. About people staring, about fear, and about a woman named Clara who protected her. Clara, Maya repeated. Yes, she says Clara taught her everything. I never understood what that meant until now. 2 weeks later, Maya stood inside Charleston International Airport, holding a small sign with Grace Thompson's name written in black marker. She had decided this story couldn't be researched from Brooklyn. Grace emerged from the crowd, a woman in her early 50s, warm-eyed, with high cheekbones that echoed the woman in the 1906 photograph. Recognition passed instantly between them. Grace hugged Maya tightly. Thank you for coming, Grace said. I know restoring the photo was your job. This is something more. This is history, Maya replied. And it deserves to be understood. They drove through Charleston as afternoon light turned the streets gold. Grace pointed out landmarks as they passed. Historic, black neighborhoods. Churches that had survived fire and violence. Streets shaped by memory as much as by brick and stone. The house in the photograph was gone, torn down in the 1950s, Grace explained. Urban renewal, at Grace's home. The dining room had been transformed into a research space. Family photographs covered the walls. Boxes of letters were stacked neatly on the table. A whiteboard displayed a hand-drawn family tree stretching back generations. Grace lifted a small cardboard box and carefully unwrapped a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. These are Sarah's, she said. She wrote them to her daughter between 1924 and 1948. Then Grace reached for something else, a small leather-bound journal with a broken clasp. This, she said softly, is why I contacted you. The journal belonged to Clara Bennett. It covered the years 1902 to 1928. Maya opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, each entry dated, each observation precise. It wasn't just a diary. It was a record of births, illnesses, treatments, and deaths within Charleston's black community. An entry from August 1906 caught Maya's eye. Sarah continues to thrive despite the talk among some families. Her eyes and hair make her a curiosity, but she is bright and quick to learn. I have convinced her mother to keep her close to home until she is older and stronger. The world is not always kind to those who are different. Maya looked up slowly. She knew, Maya said, from the beginning. Grace nodded, tears gathering. Clara was there when Sarah was born. They read deeper. Clara Bennett had been born in 1870. The daughter of formerly enslaved people who passed down knowledge of herbal medicine and midwifery. By the time the journal began, Clara was already trusted with the community's most fragile moments: births, sickness, death. Another entry dated June 1906 read, "Delivered Ruth's 5th child today. The baby's appearance is unusual. One eye pale, one dark, a white streak in her hair. Ruth fears the child is cursed. I assured her she is healthy and whole, only different." Maya felt the weight of it settle in. Clara didn't have a medical term, but she understood. As the years passed in the journal, Clara's involvement deepened. She monitored Sarah's development closely, noting normal milestones, but also recording community reactions. People whisper. Some fear what they do not understand. Ruth keeps Sarah mostly at home, which is wise for now. By 1908, Clara's role had changed. I have offered to teach Sarah myself when she is older. Knowledge is the best protection we can give a child who will face scrutiny. Maya noticed something else. Clara wrote about many children, but she returned to Sarah again and again. Not just as a patient, as a responsibility. As someone worth protecting. Grace closed the journal carefully. She didn't just help her survive, Grace said. She shaped who she became. Maya looked back at the restored photograph in her mind. The serious little girl sitting on the porch steps. For the first time, she understood why that child had survived a world that wasn't built for her. Someone had stood between her and it. The proof of Sarah's life did not end in ink and paper. It lived in memory. The next morning, Grace took Maya to the Charleston County Public Library, where decades of black community records were preserved in quiet rooms lined with boxes and fading files. The archivist, an elderly man named Frederick, listened carefully as Grace explained who they were searching for. Clara Bennett, he repeated slowly. My grandmother used to speak of her. Said she delivered half the babies on the east side. Smartest woman she ever knew. Taught herself medicine. When no school would have her, he returned with hospital records from the Cannon Street Hospital and training school for nurses. Sarah, admitted 1922, sponsored by Clara Bennett. Graduated 1925 with honors. Grace covered her mouth. Clara had not only protected Sarah. She had opened a door no one else would. Employment records showed Sarah working as a registered nurse in Charleston's poorest neighborhoods, places marked by overcrowding, and neglect. Letters Sarah wrote later explained what that meant. At first they stare at my eyes. But when I help deliver a healthy baby, or bring down a fever, they forget my difference. Clara taught me that being undeniably good at your work silences fear. On the third day, Grace took Maya to the cemetery. Sarah's grave was modest, well cared for. 1906-1952 beloved mother, grandmother, and healer. As they stood there, an elderly woman approached slowly with a cane. "You're Sarah's family?" she asked. Grace nodded. "She delivered me," the woman said. 1949. "Doctors said I wouldn't live. Sarah came to our house every day for 6 weeks. Saved my life. Her name was Dorothy." She smiled through tears. People called her the nurse with angel eyes. One eye dark, one eye light. But she never hurried, never judged. She just helped. Over the following days, more stories emerged. Children Sarah had delivered. Illnesses she treated. Lives she quietly saved. Photographs surfaced. Sarah standing confidently at health fairs, teaching mothers how to keep their children alive. Her eyes were still different. But now they looked steady, unafraid. Sarah worked until 6 months before her death. She was 46. Her final letters revealed the truth she had carried since childhood. "Clara, me, that difference can be a burden or a gift. I chose to carry it as strength." 3 months later, the restored photograph hung at the center of a museum exhibition, titled "Hidden Faces, Revealed Lives." The 4-year-old girl on the porch steps was no longer a mystery. She was a nurse, a healer, a woman who turned fear into service. As visitors stood before the image, Maya watched them pause, first at the damage that once hid the child, then at the eyes that had survived history's silence. One photograph, one child, a life almost erased. Seen at last. The end.